when you think about human first, it doesn't necessarily mean softer, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that there's no structure and, right? That's what some people can think of. Human first, it's too soft. But when I think of humans and caring for humans, I think of things like transparency, right? Being honest with somebody and direct, right? Rather than beating around the bush. And sometimes that's hard, right? Because it doesn't feel like you're caring for somebody.
Hello, Christy. Welcome to Lazy Entrepreneur Podcast. It's so good to meet you again and to have you join me today for a very, I would say special episode, because this is a topic that I deeply believe in, because I'm all about taking care of people and I manage a lot of people, and I believe that people, they're the most important aspect of the business, especially if they're your product, right? In my virtual assistant agency, my people, they're actually the product that I sell. So I have to make sure that I take care of them really, really good. But before we dig deeper, I want you to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me here, Christy. Always nice to connect with another Christy. So I am Christy Wojnicki. I am the founder of the Woj Group. I've spent my career leading teams across HR, customer success, and operations in high growth companies, including startups and large tech organizations like LinkedIn. And I particularly started the Woj Group because I was ready to bring that amazing amount of rigor and expertise that I gained in that career to small businesses and startups, those that are ready to grow but are feeling the pains of growth, if you will. Helping to really uncover clarity, accountability, and ownership within the organization so they can create the right systems for sustainable growth.
I love that. And how long have you been again in the HR industry?
From the get-go of my career, I started at Career Builder, running recruitment projects. So that was back in the day of job boards. So really, I've always been within the talent and HR space, both on the commercial side and as a hands-on practitioner.
Okay, I love that. And what made you decide to start your own business?
Yeah, you know what it was? It was the pattern that really started to come to the top, if you will. I have been fortunate to have a span of a career over multiple organizations of different sizes. But I saw the same thing happening no matter which organization it was. And that was decisions that were driven by instinct, sometimes ego, sometimes gut. And I often saw how, there were assumptions made, but those assumptions weren't actually true. And so the decisions that were made ended up not being the right decisions for what they were trying to accomplish. And so once I really recognized that pattern, I was ready to do the hard work myself and help co-create solutions alongside founders and CEOs to build better foundations, than what I had seen and how I'd seen it done previously.
I love that. So, you've worked with a lot of people, leaders, right? And that's why you mentioned that, some leaders, they make a decision based on pride and ego, not really based on data. And can you give us an example of what that type of decision that a particular leader made that is based on instinct, pride and ego, instead of data, and what was the effect of that decision to the company?
Sure. So at one particular high growth company, I was brought into a strategic role across a development team, a talent development team. So it was a brand new leader that had come from an external company. And then the rest of the leadership team was a mix of existing internal leaders and new leaders as well. And it was a new strategy, right? The organization had never done learning and development this way. They were looking to do it differently. And what I started to find is these amazing experts that had built their careers within talent development, talent management to really make people successful in turn making businesses successful, and bringing solutions to the table, really amazing, thoughtful, impactful solutions. And I saw the reaction of the leadership team who didn't have this expertise, right? The CEO came from product, and the responses were, this is not going to work for us. Yeah, that's nice, but we got to do it differently. We're different. And I was waiting for the data to come in. I was waiting to say, this is why it won't work, because of this data, right? Or having some real truth behind it, and it never came. And so that was a very clear moment for me where I went, there's got to be a better way. And I know when I was in middle management, I was always asked to bring data, and it was wonderful learning for me. I knew anytime I had an ask or a proposal or a solution, it better be within, the framework of a business case that includes data. And so, that was definitely an inflection point for me where I saw, right, and they're real smart people and everybody's very well-intentioned, right? They want it to work. But when you're moving with gut, what I ended up seeing was a very talented team be demoralized, feel like their work wasn't meaningful or that it wasn't respected. And you really started to then see the breakdown of the team. So, just in that one situation, I saw how quickly, leading with gut, ego, instinct can really have a lasting impact, negative impact.
Right. And why do you think some leaders make a decision based on instincts and pride and ego?
I mean, I do believe it's, in most cases that they've had a very successful career for a reason, right? And they've been in different organizations or different facets, and they've gotten to that leadership role likely for good reason, right? And so, I think that we tend to lean on our experiences without validating it. And so I think that's the important piece is I think sometimes instinct can be right, but it's ensuring that you're validating it because it can be a very costly expense by just saying, well, in my experience and this one time at the last company, there's just factors and variables that, right, you may not be thinking about. So I think it comes from a good place. I think it comes from a place of wanting to have the answer, having experience, right, and wanting to bring that real life experience forward. But again, I think it's humbling yourself and saying, hey, I think this is right, but let me make sure that it is. So,
right. Yeah, I love that. And there's really nothing bad about our instinct, right? Sometimes,
right.
They say mother's instinct is the best, because
right.
they know, what's going on with the baby or whatever, right? So, but I think, I agree with what you said, that as long as it's backed by data, especially if you're running a company, you can never solely rely just on your instincts, but you have to back it up with data. And sometimes pride and ego, they're not bad as well, because,
they're meant to protect us.
Yeah, true. Yeah. When you are very confident about yourself, there's pride in that, right? Because you're proud of your accomplishments and all that. And, pride and ego, they're part of our characteristics for a reason, right? As long as, as long as we use it correctly in the business, right? Yeah. And in terms of, backing up decisions with data, what data are we talking about here? Because when people hear data, what is that, numbers? Like, what do you mean?
What does data mean? Right. And it depends on what your goal is, your initiative is, as far as determining what those inputs are. Particularly for me, when I think of kind of the scope of work that I do, I conduct an assessment to pull in the right data points before I decide really before I recommend what really should be done and how the organization should move forward. So that's things like qualitative data, When you think of direct leadership interviews, right? The direct feedback and the stories of what's going on, more quantitative data through employee value surveys. I am partnering with an organization called Coefficient that doesn't just do the surveys. It really draws the insights from those responses. And then it's also process reviews, right? So it's not only what the people are experiencing, but are the process and operations, right, supporting what they're saying. And so it's ensuring that you're pulling in multiple inputs, right, from different areas to really tell the full story. So for me, when it comes to kind of the people side of the business and the operations that connect it, those are some of the key inputs that I look for. It's not only the commentary, the stories, but it's insights, survey data that can, again, help validate that. And then also really understanding the operations and the processes behind it.
Right. Yeah. So when we first met, we kind of talked about, some leaders, they already know what to do, but they can't just make that decision, and they want other people to make that decision for them, right? And I'm pretty sure you've experienced that a lot. And why do you think that is?
It's a great question. Because it's scary, right? To be, the end all be all.
To be the jerk.
Right? And I think that it's easier when when you feel like you're sharing responsibility, if you will, right? If you don't have to be the ultimate decision maker, if you can help share that, then if it doesn't go right, you don't. It's not even necessarily. In some ways, it is protecting yourself, but also not wanting to be the one to screw it all up, right? You want to be the one that's moving it forward. So I know, particularly for me, as a business owner, when I decided to go into business for myself, that was actually a differentiator and something I thought about, which is, hey, when the way that you've behaved in the past in your more corporate roles, have you shied away from making decisions? Does it feel uncomfortable for you to be the decision maker? And that's actually where I said, no, it is not uncomfortable. I know the responsibility that comes with it. So I think particularly for new founders, new CEOs who are still feeling a little trepidatious of, really being that, really owning a decision. You have to trust yourself. You have to trust the success that you've seen previously, and that's going to continue to carry you forward. And ultimately, it also sets a great example for your team and how you grow, right? Which is, we're not perfect. We may make mistakes, but it's about how we handle it and how we move forward. So if anything, I think it can be very powerful for CEOs to own the decisions, knowing that they're always not going to turn out exactly how you want it, and being able to set that example for the team of, hey, we fall forward, right? We're not perfect. It's not going to hit every single time, but let me demonstrate to you how I hold myself accountable. And that really kind of helps sets culture as well.
Right. Yeah. I love that. So it says in your background right now, human first, business forward, right?
Yes.
And I also believe in that, that you have to take care of your people. And how do companies go about that? Like, how we should put people first, and how should we take care of them to have a great team culture?
Absolutely. So the reason I, landed on this tagline for my organization, and really starting with the human side of it, because that's what work is. That's what businesses are. They're groups of people, right? Working towards a common goal. That's the foundation of it. And I don't think it's that hard to align with the idea that successful people will make successful businesses. And so when you think about, human first, it doesn't necessarily mean softer, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that there's no structure and, right? That's what some people can think of. Human first, it's too soft. But when I think of humans and caring for humans, I think of things like transparency, right? Being honest with somebody and direct, right? Rather than beating around the bush. And sometimes that's hard, right? Because it doesn't feel like you're caring for somebody. For example, if it's a performance issue, a lot of times I see the buck get passed around. People don't want to have the direct conversations, right? But when I think about it, that's not really caring for your people if you can't be honest with them. And so when I think of human first, right, I always like to call out, it doesn't necessarily mean soft. It doesn't mean less accountability. If anything, it means more, because that's in service of the person. It's in service of their success and their career. So when I think about human first, I think about what anybody would want in their work, which is transparency. They want to know the right things at the right time and understand the why behind it, right? So that comes with clarity, right? Clarity of the common goals, what we're working towards. And again, I go back to accountability, which is holding ourselves, our peers, and each other accountable, right? And so these are the words that I think of when I think of human first, which maybe not everybody does, but that's how I define it.
Yeah, I love that. I actually watched a video a few years ago, which I just had my team rewatch again yesterday. So once a month we have like a session with all of my team members under my operations team. It's called Lunch and Learn, where we watch like a very informational, value adding video for maybe 20 to 30 minutes, and then we share our key takeaways and how we can apply our learnings to the work that we're doing. And so this video is all about radical candor. I don't know if it is something that you've heard before, but it's by Kim something. I forget her last name, but it's on YouTube. She's basically saying that radical candor is all about caring and challenging directly. And so it's like you can be nice, but you can't be too nice where you're too afraid to give feedback, where you're too afraid to tell that person what needs to improve. And she even gave an example that there's this person named Alex, and he's a very likable person, maybe very extrovert, very upbeat. And he asked each of his colleagues their favorite chocolate, like what chocolate was given to them when they were potty trained by their parents, right? And everybody was like, "Oh, Hershey's, this." And so he gave most of the time, I think, he gives chocolate to his colleagues, and because he's very, very nice, nobody spoke up about his performance. He was really underperforming. Like he was a nice person, but he sucks, when it comes to his job. Yep. And then by the time the supervisor or the manager, sat with him and talked to him about his performance, and he was actually gonna get fired that day. And he was like, "I thought you guys liked me. Why nobody told me about this?" And
right.
And I feel like Alex, I'm pretty sure he knows what he was doing, right? It's probably his like mask, when he gives chocolate to other people, it's like, okay, I need them to like me so that they won't notice about my work, or they don't want tell negatively about my work. And so I feel like with Alex, I feel like even though he knows his mistakes, he still kind of like blamed the leadership, because, well, you notice it, but why didn't you tell me? And so I think that's also part of having a great team culture is, like you said, being transparent, being able to challenge directly while caring. And so I'm pretty sure you've dealt with that.
That's a great example. One, because in your example, likely the other team, the rest of the team was suffering in their work because Alex wasn't performing, right? So like everybody's being nice, but there's like, right, this hidden tension that's happening. And then on the flip side, I've seen it also happen where somebody just isn't the right fit for that role. And maybe they are a good talent and could be saved in terms of, hey, this is good talent. I think it just needs to be placed someplace else.
Right.
And you end up ruining relationship, right? Having to fire somebody really sucks, right? Getting fired sucks. And so having maybe a hard conversation early on, right, can mitigate having the really terrible conversation later on, right? And potentially you can find opportunity and success, right, by having that radical candor, as you said. I love that term, radical candor. And so, right, like it's almost like what could be if you had taken the time, had the hard conversation early, and what different outcomes could you have seen because of it?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So what are some of practical steps a leader can do to make sure that the team culture is sustained? Do they need to have team buildings? Do they need to have fellowship? Do they need to have feedback session? Like, what are like some practical ways?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, it's recognizing the symptoms. So, what I find is often, founders and CEOs, when they start hitting that friction, right? As I mentioned, I work with, high growth companies. And so what they typically see is symptoms, and they can't explain it and can't understand it. And so I think if anything, first and foremost is changing the mindset, which is recognizing the signals and saying, what's causing this, right? So, right, an example would be, I keep losing people, right? I can hire people, I find talent, but then they keep leaving me. But our surveys look great. Nobody's telling me otherwise, right? And so they want to solve for, okay, I just need leaders that want to stay with me, without really uncovering, well, why did they leave in the first place, right? Because there's a disconnect clearly. You think it's a great place to work, but you are having people leave. So where's the data to fill in that gap, if you will? So I think that's first and foremost, is a CEO who's willing to recognize the signals and say, before jumping to execution or a solution or making assumptions, is slowing down, getting those data inputs like we talked about. Talk to your leaders, dig into your employee surveys, right? Talk to the process leaders, the process owners, and say, hey, can you walk me through this? Because I don't think we've changed this in a while. Should we? Right? So I think that's first and foremost is, right, kind of changing that mindset, knowing just because things are going wrong doesn't mean it can't be fixed, right? Or there isn't a solution. And I think also, something so that's first and foremost. That's going to build trust, right? When a CEO is inquisitive and curious about what's going on, that's going to start building the trust, right? Like that kind of helps start setting that foundation for a strong culture. So, to kind of get back to the question at hand, which is, what should CEOs and founders be doing to drive their teams forward? It's going to depend, right, on the organization. But I think by slowing down, finding the right inputs, it can actually be pretty clear, if you will, what rises to the top as far as the risks and opportunity, and really where you should be prioritizing your time.
Right. I love that. And I normally do like a quarterly check-in with my core team members, the team members of the team members that I handle, because I only get to meet most of the time with my core team, my team members, and they have their own downlines. And so every quarter I try my best to really meet with their downlines to get feedback, to get to know them, and all that kind of stuff. And actually, it's not a problem anymore right now, because most of the people that we had problems with, we kicked them out already. But to be honest, like a few years ago, there was like a very difficult season in my business owner year that, I did feedback sessions with my downlines. However, they're like, oh, but don't tell it to that person. And I was like, how can I share this? How can I help you if you don't want me to share this with that person?
Right.
And I feel like, do you just want me to have a negative thoughts about this person, and you don't want me to improve the situation. And so and there were like quite a few of them, because they also kind of like had their own group. They were close, and they're probably gossip about this one person. They're like, oh, blah 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 blah, and so I was like, and so initially I thought there was a problem with this person that they're talking about, that they have a problem with. But eventually I realized this group of people are actually the problem, because first, they're not very transparent, even though the other person wants to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And then later on, they ended up, some of them they quit, some of them we terminated, but they ended up creating their own agency, and they poach our clients and our team members. And so when that happened, I was like, they're not really the right fit, to the business.
And you were able to uncover that because you put a system in place, though, Chrissy.
Right.
I mean, that's the other piece to this. We've talked about kind of the importance of people, the importance of accountability. But there's a system aspect, right? Is to systemize these things to keep them in check, right? So, for example, should a CEO be meeting with every single team member every week or even every month? No, right? That's why we put leaders in place and we structure and org accordingly, right? But to your point, there are definitely those opportunities for a leader to dive deep, knowing when to come back up, right? Because they can't stay deep, otherwise they're too far into the weeds. And so exactly what you did, which is I made sure to, right, we used to call them skip levels at some of the organizations I would have, right? But right, and that idea was to know what's happening in the business and what's going on. And to your point, you were able to decipher less about, is this feedback I really need to action? And what you really were able to uncover is, this might actually be more of a culture thing, because what I would hope is that my employees and my team members can be candid with each other, open and honest with each other to resolve these issues and move forward. And right, you ended up uncovering maybe a little bit of a cultural glitch, if you will, in the matrix. But would you have been able to uncover that without the system that you had put into place? I don't know. So I think that touches on kind of the next piece of it too, which is putting the right systems into place.
Yeah, we've really learned. I've learned my lessons. And so I have been careful when it comes to adding team members to my leadership team, because team culture is very, very important to me. And I think also, I always tell my COO that, you know what, I don't really stress about when there's no sales, no leads, or, when the numbers are down. I don't stress too much about that, because I know it fluctuates. There are months where we're okay. There are months where we're like not so okay, but I know that the following month will be okay, But then I told her, but what I get concerned about, or what I get stressed the most, is when there's conflict among the team members. Because that really interrupts, the culture and their day-to-day workflow and their responsibilities, right? So that's why I'm a firm believer that you really have to take care of your people, because if you don't take care of your people, your product is gonna suck, and your revenue is gonna go down. And I have learned to also, just give grace, but know when to stop, because sometimes because we have monthly performance card, and so we know that when somebody is failing, we give them grace. But after so many months, if you're still, if your performance card is still red, it's time to let go of that individual, and and you're giving them a favor, actually, to move on to something that probably would fit their skill set more than what you're currently having them do.
Yep. I think this was called out through an exercise at a startup I worked for, that it was called out in an exercise, the difference between kind of kind and nice. And the distinguishment was the idea of nice isn't really taking care of the person. It's just to make sure that it's to avoid discomfort, right? When you're being nice. Being kind looks a little bit different because it really is taking the individual into account. So exactly to your point of sometimes having to let somebody go, it feels awful in that moment, but it's the best decision that you can make for them.
Right, exactly. And so, not all CEOs want to deal with conflict, right?
Yeah.
That's why they have HR managers, or they bring in a third party person to deal with those problems, right? And who wants to deal with conflict, right? Like,
Right.
nobody, but it's inevitable, right? So when is the best time for a CEO to hire someone kind of like you, to bring inside the business to kind of assess, okay, this is what's going on, and, advise the CEO what to do?
Yeah. So, to your point, I mean, I think business coaches should probably be brought in early and often, or executive coaches, if you will.
Right.
Especially for CEOs that still struggle with, right, some of the delegation and decision making and the hard conversations. I think part of it too, though, is sometimes CEOs, they don't have anybody else to have the hard conversation. So whether they like them or not, right, it's everything keeps ending and escalating with them, right? I mean, as the CEO and owner, you can make the argument the buck always starts and stops with them, but in some ways it shouldn't, right? There's a reason that you hire team members to be able to delegate to, or to be able to better handle, right, certain conflict that arises. And so I think particularly, signals for the CEO is when, particularly when they're overburdened. That's one of the biggest signals I hear, that they, and not for lack of trying, right? Not for lack of trying to give up control or trying to delegate, but it just still keeps coming back on their plate. That's when somebody needs to come in to really assess, align, and take a multifaceted approach, right? Because it's not going to be one solution to make the fix. There's likely going to be multiple angles that need to be hit. And so again, I think for the CEO, it's kind of going back to what I said before, pay attention to those signals, right? When things start to feel like they're breaking, start going into the causes. And I think that's when those are starting to compound. That's when you want to bring in some outside expertise to help you, is when it's really becoming overwhelming, not for lack of trying, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. And I 100% agree as well when you said, bring in a coach, an executive coach, a business coach, because I believe that every founder, entrepreneur should have one. It's hard to do things alone, right? And they say, it can be lonely at the top, but it's actually up to you if you want to be lonely at the top. There are a lot of things that you can do to be happy while you're leading your team. So,
absolutely.
Thank you for the great insight. I love everything that you shared. So as we wrap up, my previous guest left a question for you, which I feel like something that is kind of like fit for what you're doing right now as you're building your own business. So how do you maintain your sanity in building the business, and what's one habit that has helped you so far?
Yeah. So I think to maintain my sanity, it's which is interesting because it is, I think you like agree, Christy, part of building the business is strong networking, right? And making strong connections to other individuals and businesses that align, right, to how you kind of do the work. But I've also found that's helped me maintain my sanity, because you have those moments where you're like, am I nuts? Is this what's going on? Am I thinking about this in the right way? And you're used to, if you've had a previous corporate career, turning to your right and your left to run it by someone. And so I've really been fortunate through some of my networking. Christy, you and I were able to connect.
Yes.
Is finding really great, amazing, talented experts in their field who can kind of share the war stories, if you will, and the struggles that they had. And I think that really, one, helps me feel not alone. And also know that those moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, am I nuts? No, you're not nuts. You're just an entrepreneur and you're trying to start a business, and that's how you're going to feel. So I think from a sanity standpoint, really find those people early that you connect with and that you can share with, and right, especially with that mental load, right? I think that's important. Best practice, I was afraid of how much should I be spending when I start this business, right? Startup costs, what do I need to get things up and running? And I think something that I initially thought going into it is you shouldn't be spending money. There's AI tools, there's different software that can help you do a lot of this. But what I did find was it's still going to take me a long time to do certain things because I can't be an expert in everything. And so from a best practice standpoint, I think it's getting very clear on what you can invest, right? Mm-hmm. If you're not raising capital and it's your own investment, what can you afford, right? What can you invest? But then also not being afraid to invest it in the areas where you say, this is going to take me so much time, but I do believe it's critical for my business. Because I would much rather be then working on something else that I can pay somebody to do who's going to do it awesome, is going to do it way quicker and way better than I can. So I can focus on other critical things. So I think from a best practice standpoint is if you, have the capital, not being afraid to invest it, but just being smart about it, right? Understanding what your skills and capacities are and where you can fill the gaps with outside help.
Right.
And sometimes it's free. I'll say I'm very fortunate. I have a cousin who does CRM implementations. He's an expert. And I reached out to him. I said, hi, can you help me? So I think that's another thing. Don't be afraid to ask for help. People are so much more willing to do it than you think.
I love that. And sometimes it sounds so cliche, right? When you say, don't be afraid to ask for help, but it's not, it may sound simple, but it's sometimes it's hard for other people to do that. Right.
Oh, yeah.
But once you ask for help, a lot of load on your shoulder are going to be lifted off. And you will feel very, very light. And you can do other things that are maybe revenue generating in your business, rather than, creating captions for your social media, creating graphics, you can build your networking community and, add value to them and they add value to you too. So it's a win-win situation. So I definitely agree with what you said there. Yeah. So where can people find you online, Christy? Oh, before you answer that, actually.
So you can.
Well, sorry. Before you answer that,
because I know. What do you got?
Because I know I'm gonna forget this question. What question do you want to leave, for my next guest?
Yes. When starting your business, what was the biggest fear that you had to overcome, and how did you overcome it?
I love that question. I love it. Thank you so much for that question.
Of course.
Okay, now this is for real. Where can people find you online?
Absolutely. So of course, I'm on LinkedIn. So Christy Wojnicki on LinkedIn or the Woj Group. You can also find me at thewojgroup.com. Exactly
awesome.
How it's spelled, Woj, W-O-J. So that's where you can find me. There's some cool content on the website. There's a quiz if folks are interested in getting a quick diagnosis, if you will, on what's happening in their organization. And I'd love to hear from you.
I love it. Thank you so much, Christy, for your time today.
Thanks, Christy.